weekend. Bye-bye.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war, calls now for a ceasefire are intensifying, but opinions are split as to whether or not that is indeed the right next step. Is it? You tell me. And over in this country, it's 1 year ago today since Rishi Sunak became the Prime Minister. Is he doing a good job? According to one poll, apparently almost 3/4 of voters want an early general election. Are you one of them? If so, tell me why. And is social media a curse when it comes to good mental health? Apparently, 40-odd states in America are saying yes, basically, it is. They are taking legal action against this social media giant, Meta, as a result. What do you make to this? Should we follow suit? Is social media a force for good or not? I'll have all of that to come and lots more. But before we cross to that, let's look at the news.
Michelle, thank you. Well, let's just bring you some breaking news we've received within the last hour or so. The first consignment of humanitarian aid from the UK to Gaza is now on its way to Egypt. The Ministry of Defence confirming an RAF plane carrying 21 tonnes of supplies, which included medical equipment and water filters, are on their way. The government says stockpiles of wound care packs donated by the Department for Health are also going. The aid will be distributed through the Egyptian Red Crescent. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is refusing to support calls for a ceasefire in the region, despite pressure from more than 80 of his MPs to do so. Instead, Rishi Sunak is backing what he's calling specific pauses in the conflict to allow for the safe delivery of aid into the region. 5 British people are still among more than 200 being held hostage in Gaza.
The first and most important principle is that Israel has the right to defend itself under international law. Our support for that position is absolute and unchanged. But from the start, we have also said that we do want British nationals to be able to leave Gaza, and that we want hostages to be released and for humanitarian aid to get in. And we recognise that for all of that to happen, there has to be a safer environment, which of course necessitates specific pauses as distinct from a ceasefire.
Well, the UN Secretary-General has rejected Israel's accusation that he justified the terror attacks carried out by Hamas on October the 7th. Yesterday, Antonio Guterres told the Security Council it's important to recognise the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. Well, in response to that, Israel's UN ambassador condemned his speech as shocking and has called on the man to resign. The UK government also criticised the comments, saying they were undiplomatic. Antonio Guterres himself has defended the speech, saying it has been misinterpreted.
I am shocked by the misrepresentations by some of my statement yesterday in the Security Council, as if I was justifying acts of terror by Hamas. This is false. It was the opposite. In the beginning of my intervention yesterday, I clearly stated, and I quote, "I have condemned unequivocally the horrifying and unprecedented 7 October acts of terror by Hamas in Israel."
Now, a former South Wales police officer has been jailed for life with a minimum term to serve of 12 years for sexual offences against children. Lewis Edwards used fake social media accounts and posed as a teenager to groom more than 200 young girls online. He forced his victims to take indecent videos and images of themselves, then using the material to blackmail them. In sentencing, the judge described his behaviour as cruel and sadistic and said he posed a dangerous risk to children. Head of the Met's online investigation team, Detective Superintendent Tracy Rankin, said the force was quick to respond.
It was just devastating to know that that person was one of our own at the time of the offending, and I'm really grateful of the swift nature that he failed to stop being a police officer, because, you know, he was sacked, which I'm really, you know, that sends a very strong message that, you know, we won't tolerate this sort of activity and behaviour.
Meanwhile, 2 Metropolitan Police officers have been sacked after being found guilty of gross misconduct over the stop and searches of 2 black athletes. Ricardo dos Santos and his partner Bianca Williams were stopped in their car in London in 2020. Nothing was found and no arrests were made. But the pair publicly accused the force of racial profiling. 5 officers were investigated. All of them denied wrongdoing, but the panel upheld complaints against PC's Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks. Residents affected by flooding say the offer of a government grant for Storm Barbet is too little, too late. The government's offering a £500 package towards council tax relief or funding towards repairs and flood protection. It says the money will be available to those who've experienced exceptional localised flooding amid the extreme weather conditions. Well, flood-hit residents say the amount's not enough, with higher energy and living costs on the rise. GB News presenter Anne Diamond has been made an OBE at Buckingham Palace today. The journalist received the honour from His Majesty King Charles for her services to public health and charity. It recognised her campaigning efforts too for research into cough deaths following the death of her own son Sebastian from sudden infant death syndrome. She said in June that she'd received news of the honour on the same day she was diagnosed with breast cancer. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight alongside me, the columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, and the co-founder of... No, I was just about to say the co-founder of Novara Media, but he is not. This is definitely... I don't think you've ever been mistaken for this guy before. Matthew Stadlen is alongside me. I'm so sorry, I was on autopilot then. I must have Aaron Bastani on my brain, but no, this is Matthew. Very delighted to introduce you back to the panel tonight. You know the drill, don't you, as well, on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us three, or Aaron, quite frankly. It's about you guys at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. GBViews at gbnews.com is how you get hold of me, or you can tweet me at GBNews. Of course, top story in town today, the Israel-Hamas war continues. I frequently feel like I say this, but things do seem to be getting worse by the day, so it seems. There do seem to be, though, the calls for ceasefire getting loudly called by various different parties now as being the next step that is required. I have to say that view does divide opinion. I shall throw it to my panel first and foremost. Peter Hitchens, on this situation about whether or not the ceasefire now, calls for ceasefire, is the next right step, is it?
Well, I don't think Israel should ever have launched a bombardment of Gaza. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes they've ever made. It's completely drawn attention away from the origin of this whole event, the horrible pogrom on October the 7th, when Hamas burst into Israel and slaughtered innocent people. I don't know why they did it. It's completely counterproductive. It won't destroy Hamas. It will inevitably, as always happens when you bomb populated cities, it will kill innocent people, and it won't do any military good either. So I'm baffled as to why they ever started, and if they would only stop it, it can't but be a good thing. And I speak as probably the most militantly pro-Israel person you're likely to meet in a month of Sundays. So I just cannot see why they don't stop it.
Well, I've got a lot to say in response to that, but before I do, Matt, your thoughts on, firstly, what Peter just said?
I mean, I don't always agree with Peter. We've certainly clashed on social media in the past. I've interviewed him lots of times. But I think on this, he's talking good sense. And I'll tell you why I think he's talking good sense, because I think it was obviously Hamas's aim to lure Israel into killing civilians and potentially actually to go in this ground offensive as well. Heaven knows how many Israeli soldiers will lose their lives if they were to do that. We know that thousands of Palestinians, many of them civilians, have already lost their lives as a consequence of the Israeli bombing. And I'm not sure, even if they were successful in destroying the Hamas military leadership, whether actually in the long run this isn't going to create significantly more hate, if that's possible, within Gaza. And one further thing to say about this, and this is not to denigrate for a single second from the medieval barbarism that we witnessed in Israel on October the 7th. It was,
and I have to say, you're
it was unspeakable.
Well.
I'm Jewish. My grandparents were forced out of their houses in Vienna, from their apartments in Vienna in the 1930s by Hitler. So clearly, not just as a human being, but as a Jew, I have enormous empathy for the horrors that we have witnessed in Israel. But remember that the political leadership of Hamas, at least some of them, are cosily sitting in Qatar. So Israel isn't able to reach them. I'm not sure that by bombing Gaza into smithereens, Israel is actually working in its own national self-interest.
You see, I want to invite you guys in at home at this point, because I know my audience well enough. I speak to you guys every day and I can almost hear you shouting from your sofa. Many people will be shouting that they felt that, you know, every single person in the land with a brain cell would conclude and concede that actually what Hamas did, I agree with you, they're barbaric. It is horrendous what happened on October the 7th. It's almost beyond comprehension what they did. But because they did that, there'll be many of my audience that say it is, of course, regrettable that the acts have to be taken in response. But you can't just, what do? Just sit there and go, you know what? You've come in on your paragliders, you've burst through your fences, you've grabbed people in their homes, you've grabbed people off festivals. You know what? Hey, just don't worry about it. They've got to do something.
There's no logic in what you say. By bombing Gaza, do you think you're going to do anything to the Hamas leadership or the Hamas military organisation? They're deep underground. They have their own electricity supplies, their own generators.
So you do nothing there?
They have their own water supplies. They have their own food. They will not suffer in the slightest from this. The people who will suffer will be the ordinary people of Gaza. I've been to Gaza. There are an awful lot of people there who are constantly terrified by the bombardments which come on their homes because Hamas has provoked them. Hamas provoked this attack. They wanted the Israelis to respond in this way, and they're delighted that they have done. Napoleon Bonaparte gave a very good piece of advice more than 200 years ago to people who are engaging in war: never interrupt your enemy while he is making a mistake. What Hamas did was a terrible mistake because they revealed the true face of a huge amount of the anti-Israel movement to a world which has got used to believing very much in the anti-Israel propaganda, which is very common. They actually showed that what this is actually about is people who hate Israel and will always hate Israel, and until the world stops giving them aid and comfort, they'll carry on not just hating Israel, but attacking it. That was revealed in a way which had not been seen before on October the 7th. Thanks to Israel's bombardment of Gaza, it's now slipped out of the news. All we talk about is the bombardment of Gaza. They've missed a huge opportunity to make their case. And also, what is the military or political point of this? Israel's survival does not depend on its ability to bomb blocks of flats in Gaza. It depends ultimately on the support, particularly of the United States, but the rest of the Western world. If it loses the support, the political support of the populations of the Western world, then it hasn't got long to survive.
Again, I think a lot of what Peter says is almost unimpeachable. I think he's wrong on one thing, and that is that Israel claims already, and I think it claimed quite early on in its bombardment, to have killed at least one, possibly more, of the architects of the savage acts that we saw carried out in Israel. So it's not that Hamas have completely got off scot-free. What I would say is that Israel has been very successful, if that's the right word, in assassinating members of Hamas over the years. And I think if it had taken a pause rather than rushed in the predictable way in which it has. And this has happened before because Hamas have committed atrocities in Israel before, and Israel has responded, in my view, heavy-handedly before. If it had paused and reflected and enjoyed, if that's the right word, a degree of global support for it in its moment of crisis, I think if we're talking about PR battles, PR wars, it would be doing much better than it has at the moment.
But again, I mean, I have to put this to you because I can hear my viewers and they will be saying everybody is familiar with what happened on October 7th. It was so barbaric, and it's easy for us to sit in a cosy TV studio and go, yeah, let's...
I agree.
They could have sat and they could have waited, they could have reflected.
I agree, and that's why Joe Biden, President of the United States, went over there, showed solidarity with Israel, but urged caution on the basis, in part, of mistakes that America has made before. You remember 9/11, how can any of us forget it? The world stood, or much of the world, the civilized world, stood with America after those attacks. But then what did we see? We saw Afghanistan, which turned into a 20-year nightmare, and we saw the Iraq War, which was a catastrophe by the West and lost countless civilians their lives. And it hasn't made the world a better place. And if Israel is going to make the same mistakes that we have, then in the end, Israel suffers as well.
Doing nothing is so often better than doing something stupid.
Well,
there's always this cry, so Hamas has attacked us, something must be done. Well, one thing that must be done is to strengthen the defences of Israel along that border very quickly and very firmly, and anywhere else where that might happen. And people need to be accountable for that. And one of the reasons why Israel's politicians, who frankly are not particularly, with a few exceptions, particularly impressive, instead of doing something thoughtful, wanted to placate the undoubted rage of their population against the vulnerability which had been exposed. One easy way of doing that was to bomb Gaza. But it was easy It didn't mean it was right. It didn't mean it was effective. So it is neither right nor is it effective. Bombing populated areas means you will kill innocent people. You may not intend to do so, but you will do so. So it will be laid to your account.
You say that you know the GB audience well. I would suggest that actually there's a diversity of opinions of people who watch GB News. But sure, I agree with you. Lots of people will be looking at what Peter has said, looking at what I have said, and be aghast. And what I say,
well, they're asking you a simple question.
Yes.
A lot of my viewers are getting in touch and asking me to ask you to a simple question. They're listening to what you're saying tonight, and they're asking, well, ask your panel, Michelle, what do you think Israel should have done then?
I think Israel should have paused, as I've said. I think it would have got continued to get an enormous amount of global sympathy as it paused, and it should probably have gone after the leadership of Hamas, as it has been over the years, and assassinated them. And what Netanyahu, who is this far-right Prime Minister of Israel, actually said in 2019 is he wanted to sustain Hamas. By keeping Hamas in place in Gaza, that was his barrier against a two-state solution. So Israel's leadership, it doesn't have any responsibility, I don't believe, for the savage acts, as I say, of medieval barbarism carried out by those Hamas evildoers. Of course it doesn't. But he has mismanaged this situation. And let's not forget that Israel's defences and its security apparatus and its spy chiefs failed in the most miserable way by not foreseeing those atrocities.
So if you are Jewish, if it was one of your family members that had been grabbed from their house or grabbed from this festival or whatever, so now they've got your family member, your family member is one of these hostages, would you have been comfortable then? So you're getting in touch with a power that be, where's my mum, where's my grandma, where's my relative? You know what, we're just going to pause and think.
I have friends who live in Israel. And one of the things that I did in the immediate aftermath of these attacks is get in touch with my Jewish friends in London to show solidarity. And I am deeply concerned by the rise in anti-Semitism in this country. There is no excuse for it. But my response to seeing children butchered by Hamas terrorists is not to celebrate or seek to justify the killing of lots of children in Palestine. I have a one-year-old, you have a child, lots of the GB News viewers have children, Peter has children. When I see a dead child, I think of my own child, and I'm not interested whether that child is an Israeli or a Palestinian.
Well, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to throw this one over to you and come back to it, actually, because there is still a lot more to explore. I want to look at what this ceasefire would potentially look like. Keir Starmer, he is getting himself in a lot of bother at the moment. A lot of people, a lot of councillors have done an open letter to him about his response. And also, as well, there's been a debate in Commons today about whether or not public bodies should be able to boycott Israeli goods. What do you make to it all? Also want to talk to you about lots of matters closer to this country as well. General election, should there be an early one? You tell me and I'll see you in 2.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, with you till 7 o'clock tonight, alongside with Peter Hitchens and Matthew Stadlen remain. We started the programme talking about Israel-Hamas situation. I shall continue that for a few more minutes because I think there's a lot to explore. This notion that there needs to be a ceasefire now, I find it quite interesting. There was an open letter written to, for example, Keir Starmer in this country by Muslim Labour Party councillors. They are formally calling on the Labour Party, they say, to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the humanitarian disaster. Matthew, your thoughts?
It seems to me to be a new phrase, or it's at least a phrase I haven't heard before, this idea of a humanitarian pause, and it stops short of a ceasefire. Quite what the distinction is, I'm not sure.
That's Rishi Sunak's line, isn't it? That's what he's coming out and saying.
European Union officials, I think UN officials have called for a humanitarian pause. The United States, for their part, I think yesterday said that this wasn't the time for a ceasefire while hostages were still in Hamas custody. Look, I'm not saying, and I want to be absolutely clear about this, that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself. I'm not saying even necessarily that an absolute ceasefire should take place when you have roughly 200 hostages still, as I say, in Hamas custody. What I am saying, and I'm saying it very strongly, is that the way in which Israel goes about defending itself is critical. It's in your darkest hours, whether it's us or Israel or any other nation, that you have to pay particularly close attention to the laws of war and to the international norms, to international law. If you don't, you become in severe danger further down the line.
So what's the short version summary of that? That you do want a ceasefire or you don't?
While 200 Israeli hostages, many of them civilians, some of them children, are being held by Hamas, I'm not sure that an absolute ceasefire, whatever that means, for a week or 2 weeks, necessarily makes sense. I'm not a general. I can't sit there and say that Israel should not attempt to go and get those hostages back militarily. Whether it can or not is another question. There certainly should be, as I keep saying, an obedience to international law, and that surely involves humanitarian interventions. And what is totally unacceptable, in my view, and others disagree, is that Gaza should be under siege with power and water, as we have seen, switched off. That cannot be allowed.
Do you think ceasefire, is that where you are right now?
Well, I think just on a technical point, I think a ceasefire would have to be mutual. It has to involve some sort of agreement between Israel and Hamas, presumably through intermediaries, that if Israel stopped bombing, then Hamas would stop sending rockets out of Gaza. I don't know whether that's even achievable. But my problem is, what's the rationality of this? Does anybody really believe that the continued shelling and bombing of Gaza will achieve the release of a single hostage? I can't see how or why it would do so. The very unwise threat, I think, was made by Israel at the beginning that they wouldn't turn on the water or the electricity again until the hostages were released. Well, on Hamas's usual procedure, it could be a decade before those hostages are released, and there's no reason to believe that they're going to change their policy on that. As I've been to Gaza, it's not a place which you can just easily walk into and say, well, that must be where the hostages are, we'll go and fetch them out. It isn't like that, apart from anything else. Even what you see is a major maze, but beneath that is a great web of tunnels in which it would be fantastically difficult to fight. And I just don't see the logic that bombing Gaza will help free the hostages, or indeed achieve anything else today.
One of the important things I think to tease out here is there really a difference between the political leadership of Hamas, which, as I've already said, I think reside, it seems, in Qatar, and the military leadership? Because you certainly can't deal, I don't think, with the military leadership who are capable of what we saw, those acts of savagery in Israel. The question, I suppose, is can you deal with the political leadership who are relatively safely situated in Qatar? If you can, and if the consequence of dealing with them means that you release those 200 Israelis, those Israeli hostages, then surely that is better than blowing Gaza to smithereens, as I said.
I wouldn't get mixed up in the question of the hostages. I don't know what it is that Israel would have to give Hamas for those hostages, but it would be, in most people's eyes, I'm sure, a highly unacceptable price. And people will discover if that comes, what that will be. But Michelle asked you, what would I do? I'd say, if I were Benjamin Netanyahu, I'd say to the world, we've had enough blood in this month. We should stop shedding blood now. You now look in the face of what Hamas has done. See what they came and did. It's not. This isn't what some bureaucrat at the UN says is in some kind of context or not happening in a vacuum. This is not revenge or politics. This is hatred. This is pure and simple racialist hatred of the kind everyone in the Western world has agreed to despise and exclude from everything in life. This is what they have done. This is what they are like. Stop sympathising with them. Stop making excuses for them. And actually stand behind Israel against this sort of thing. If he said that, instead of dropping bombs on Gaza, he might get somewhere in the long term.
Well, Colin disagrees. He says this basically should continue. Hamas must be completely destroyed, otherwise what happened on October the 7th will happen again. Elaine says no ceasefire. Israel must eradicate Hamas once and for all. Only then will that leave people of Israel and Gaza to live in peace. Brian says the UN and the WHO need scrapping. They've both proven and are still proving to be useless, insignificant and dangerous. Della says the only winner from a ceasefire would be Hamas. How can Israel ensure a safe future free from terror attacks if they do not finish what has now been started? Sue says, Michelle, basically, I feel like we're all just sitting here now waiting for World War III. Let me talk to you about Keir Starmer, Matt, because he really is under pressure now. I mentioned that open letter earlier on from councillors. He's seen the resignation of councillors. He was in Wales talking with some Muslim members at a mosque there. They came out and said that he'd misrepresented the conversations that they'd had and all the rest of it. He's become under fire because he didn't mention this situation in PMQs today. What do you make to all this?
So just so anyone who doesn't know where I, broadly speaking, come from, because I think it's important for people to know the context in which I speak, I'm sort of broadly in favour of a Labour government and certainly not a supporter of this Conservative government. And I think that Starmer has made mistakes here. And I predicted this. I reached out. I lost my father nearly 3 weeks ago, and so I wasn't on social media for 3 days out of respect, and that was just at the time of these atrocities. But I worried that Israel, in response to the savagery, the medievalism, would bomb Gaza to smithereens. And I worried that Labour wouldn't speak out against that because they are understandably very keen to distance the party from the horror days of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And so I reached out to, I won't say who, to a senior Labour MP and sort of beseeched him to take this point on board. And I don't think Labour did sufficiently listen in those early days. And as a consequence of that, Starmer, on another channel, I won't mention it, was being interviewed and he was asked whether Israel has a right to defend itself. And he, of course, said yes.
We don't mind healthy competition. It was LBC.
It was LBC.
Yeah,
fine.
We don't mind.
It was LBC, my former employer. And he was then asked whether a siege that cut off power and cut off water was justified. And he repeated his line that is, in a sort of robotic way, that Israel had a right to defend itself. But he did go on, and this is important, and it's been cut out of some clips on social media, he did go on to say everything needs to be done within international law. Now, that, I think, was rather a wet response. I think what he should have said is that Israel should not cut off power and water to Gaza. And he's got into trouble as a consequence because he's basically said he was misunderstood. So he's either backtracked or he's clarified what he said. He should have been clearer. And as a consequence of him not being clearer, or of him having to U-turn if he was in fact meaning that in the first place, he's losing support within his own party.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I think very much so. He's the man who tries to please everybody. And as we know from the Aesop's fables, the man who tries to please everybody ends up pleasing nobody. It's one of the many reasons why he seems to me to be obviously unfit for high office. But yes, it's a mess for him, largely of his own creation. If he'd been clearer on what he intended, he wouldn't be in the mess.
One of my close friends, actually, Shaista Aziz, who is a really good woman, she's Muslim, she wears a hijab, she has worked very, very hard for a Labour government. She's a moderate Labour person, and she's resigned in Oxford as a consequence of how she feels Starmer has handled this. She's someone who believes that killings on all sides are horrific, and she thinks that Starmer should have been quicker and clearer in his condemnation of some of the tactics or the strategies used by Israel. And I have sympathy for her on that.
Well, Debbie, one of my viewers says, Michelle, we are horrified about how your panel is responding to Israel's reaction to the massacre. You say it is Hamas that are putting their civilians at risk, not Israel. Debbie goes on to say Hamas have food and fuel that they could give to their civilians. In Debbie's view, she says Israel are doing the right thing and what we would want our government to do in this country if the same happened here. Trish says, Michelle, you are right. Many of us want Israel to act for those babies, for the innocent victims, she says. This cannot be let go. If you just sit and pause, the terrorists will think they've got the power to get and act again. They won't stop. They want to destroy Israel, and Israel must act and do whatever.
Have none of these people even got the imagination to wonder to themselves what it must be like to be a wholly innocent, non-political person in Gaza under bombardment? Have they even been within? Have they seen what a building looks like after it's been bombed?
But the viewers' points that I've just read out, they will say
Michelle,
it is Hamas.
Peter and I are not denying that Hamas are evildoers.
On the contrary,
the word medieval to describe Hamas. The question is, how do you defend Israel against this evil? Point one, and point two, what are you prepared to do in the terms of killing innocent Palestinians, including children like our children? How many of those lives are you prepared to take?
People have been using terms like eradication. Do they have any idea what they mean? Has nobody learned anything from the wars of the 20th century? The Vietnam War, where the United States dropped millions of tons of high explosive on Vietnam to try and eradicate the Viet Cong and destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Not only did they fail completely to do that, but they killed huge numbers of innocent people and devastated a country to no good effect. They lost the war. This kind of warfare does not work. Those who do it are stupid.
Do you know, I think one thing that unites us all is I think we all agree that this situation is just absolutely horrific, and, you know, hope and pray that at some point soon we start to move towards peace. I think that's what we all want. But do you actually see that happening? And if so, what would those steps need to be in your mind to even start to put us on that path? You tell me. GB Views at gbnews.com. After the break, matters closer to home. Rishi Sunak, a year to the day that he became Prime Minister, doing a good job or not? And also, apparently, almost three-quarters of us want to have an early general election. Are you one of them? Tell me why.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's your new
t-shirt.
t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, alongside me as is political commentator Matthew Stadler. Now, it is 1 year since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. I mean, I've lost count, quite frankly, of how many Prime Ministers we have had now in the last 5 years, not to mention everything else. Are you still keeping up on what number we are and when? Anyway, do you think Rishi Sunak is doing a good job or not? I'll remind you in just a second of his key 5 pledges, but it caught my eye that almost 3/4 now of Brits apparently want a general election early. They want it by May next year. Are you one of those people? Why? When? What would you like to see happen next? Get in touch and tell me. But Peter Hitchens, your thoughts?
I never yearned for general elections. I used to enjoy them when they were proper contests between proper political parties, but I've stopped doing so. I also used to know the names of every single member of Parliament in his or her constituency, and I certainly don't do that anymore. For me, they were the sort of politically interested person's equivalent of Derby Day. But now it's just a dull prospect, and I can't think of any reason why anyone would want to have one, because it's the day itself is preceded by at least 3 weeks of surging floods of drivel, which I find increasingly hard to bear.
Yeah, but you do know why people would want to have one. If people are against the Tories, they would say basically the Tories have ground the country down into an absolute mess and they want to kick them out. That's why people would say...
Why would Keir Starmer be the answer to that?
Well, you're assuming they would be Keir Starmer that would get in.
Well, I mean, there's no one else around who looks very likely to. I don't see why, if you don't like the way the country is being run, you'd elect a government run by people who'd almost certainly make it even worse than it already is. That would be a very strange logic.
I think there are a lot of people around the country who are absolutely gagging for a general election.
Are you one of them?
I would like to have a general election. Don't forget.
What, now?
Well,
when?
In May. Let's just remember that Liz Truss was not leader of the Conservative Party when we last had a general election. It was Boris Johnson. Let's also remember that Rishi Sunak was not leader of the Conservative Party when we had a general election. Now, of course, we don't elect our prime ministers.
Thank heaven.
We don't do that. But at the same time, we vote for a party knowing who is the leader of that party and who will, if we vote for that party and everyone else does or a majority does, then we get that person as prime minister. So I think there's actually quite a big democratic deficit at the moment in Britain. I think there was some hope, even from people such as myself, and I've been very, very critical consistently of the Conservatives over the last 13 years, there was some hope that Rishi Sunak would be a grown-up in the room. I think he's failed in that miserably. I think he's stoked the culture wars. I can't see a single way in which this country, in 1 year of Rishi Sunak's prime ministership, has improved. I tell you, though, I don't think there will be a general election. This is me with my analyst's hat on. I don't think there will be a general election in May because I think Sunak will be desperate to wait until inflation comes down significantly. He'll hope for that. I think he will then want interest rates, of course, to come down because people are hurting for both reasons, and he'll want to make much more progress than he's made already on his 5 pledges.
Let's bring them up, because this is what Matthew's referring to. So let's refresh our memory, shall we, on the 5 things that Rishi pledged to sort out. 1, he said he was going to halve inflation this year. 2, he said he was going to grow the economy, creating better paid jobs. 3, reducing the national debt. 4, cut the NHS waiting list. And 5, passing new laws to stop the small birds.
He's not doing very well, is he, Michelle?
Well, he would argue he's making great progress. I'm sure he would argue that.
He has cancelled quite a lot of HS2, which was definitely a very necessary and good thing to do. I think we have to applaud him for that.
I think it's very unlikely.
It was a disaster. He hasn't been. I mean, he must have heaved an enormous sigh of relief when the anniversary came around. He said, "I've actually been Prime Minister for a complete year," because it would have been quite humiliating not to have made a year.
He has made himself a hostage, not just to fortune, but to his own competence.
This is a government which is not totally harmless, but it's not actively harmful. I don't know why people are so keen on politicians anyway, but they haven't got the spirit or the organisation or the direction to do much harm. Whereas a new Labour government, after 13 years out of office, are going to be poised to do so much active harm if they
like what?
I don't know, because they won't tell us. We have no idea what they're going to do, but I know it will be bad. It will be like, remember 1997? Of course, you were so young then, but I wasn't. But in 1997, everybody said, "Oh, Blair, he's going to be wonderful," and they were completely beguiled, and they all loathed John Major, and they said, "Right, let's all vote for Blair because he's going to be great." And then they discovered this Cromwellian mass of constitutional reform, the breakup of the United Kingdom, the savaging of the economy, gigantic redistribution of wealth, and a vast politically correct sexual revolution, all dumped on them without any warning at all. And all the things they were told to expect, i.e. better schools and better policing, didn't emerge. Those are just slogans. It's the same with this lot. They won't tell you what they're going to do until they do it. And for instance, they didn't tell you, the new Labour lot, they were going to give the Bank of England its independence, one of the most disastrous decisions of modern times. But they will do things of that kind because they're new and because they're fresh and because they can. And I see absolutely no reason to hurry this day on, and lots of reasons. I'd much rather a wounded hole beneath the waterline, largely powerless government not able to do much damage than a new flashy one, all wired up to do everything wants to do.
Progress that we saw under New Labour.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
You call it progress.
I'm with you on the disastrous legacy of the Iraq War. But Labour made Labour made a lot of progress. They invested very heavily in the NHS. They invested in Sure Start. They invested in education. But as far as whether we should have a general election, I was 17 in 1997, desperate to vote. There was a real sense in the country that after 18 years of Conservative rule, people wanted change. Our political system, I think, roughly goes in cycles. The New Labour were in power for 13 years. Well, how long were they in power for? Yes, 13 years. This government has been in power for 13 years with a huge number of prime ministers. I sense the same design. You look at those 2 by-elections recently, overturning enormous Conservative majorities. Yes, some Tory voters stayed at home, but I think the sands of change are shifting. I think people desperately want to have their say, and they want to kick this lot out. They're a dying government. Peter says they can't do damage. They are doing damage.
It's irrational to imagine that just because you don't like the incumbent government, things will improve if you replace it with another government. You have to be a bit more careful about what sort of government it is you replace it with. And people are not looking at the Starmer what he is, what he's like, what his party's like, what they're likely to do. They're just saying, oh, well, let's get rid of the Tories. And then they find, you know, the fable of King Log and King Stork, the frogs. They asked the gods for a king, and the gods flung down a log, and it lay in the pond. And they said, well, this is very boring. Can we have a new, more exciting king? And so they were sent a stork, which came and ate them all up.
So should we have a Tory government forever? Should we have Rishi Sunak in number 10 forever?
I would do a great deal to avoid another Blairite government full of muscle and willingness to act and full of the desire to make the country even worse than it is already. Yes.
See, I think you two have kind of somehow, to me, highlighted one of the main problems in our political landscape, because it's listening to you, is it Labour or is it Tory? And one of the things that I cannot stand about politics in this country is that somehow political power somehow belongs either to Labour or to the Tories, and it is as simple and as cut and dry as that. I really dislike that, and I would personally really like to see a root and branch proper shake-up, new faces, new blood, new energy.
New political parties.
Not just a
we need two new... Both these parties are corpses. They have rigor mortis. They prop each other up. If one of them fell, the other would fall afterwards. But somehow or other, state subsidy, broadcasting rules keep them in existence long after they should have died.
Abigail says, Michelle, a general election as soon as possible. Why? Because this PM does not have a mandate. It's from either the electorate or its members. I object to being governed by a few men in suits, she says, who think they know better than the general public. Abigail says it is disgraceful. Tell me who you would like to see in power instead. But for now, I have to take a break. I'll bring some of your responses in just in a couple of minutes. Also, I want to ask you, social media, a power for good when it comes to mental health or not? You tell me.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Peter Hitchens, Matthew Stadlen remain. We've just been talking about whether or not there should be a general election. Peter says Sunak is doing a very good job in very difficult circumstances. And I've got to say, Peter, a lot of people don't give the Tories credit for the amount of stuff that has gone on that has been entirely outside of their control. I wonder how would any party have fared, quite frankly, over these last few years. Charlie says, Michelle, no, definitely not to a general election. He reckons Labour Party will get in, and he says, God help us if they do. Clive says we need someone who is strong and who will listen to the people. I think he's suggesting he will vote for the Reform Party when that comes along.
Michelle, one really interesting thing, because you said before the break about you were critical of the monopoly of power by these two main parties.
No, I'm critical of the monopoly of entitlement. I think that Tory and Labour, they somehow think that the people within this country belong to them. So you're either on one side or you're the other. And I find it self-indulgent, egotistical claptrap.
But there's an extent to which that it's true that we do belong to them, because that is our system, whether you like it or not. But I think it is very interesting in the upcoming election the role that smaller parties might play. Let's take, just for example...
Make a quick example, then.
The Reclaim Party. The Reclaim Party, because Richard Tice is the leader of I was going to say the Complain Party, but the Reclaim Party, and he's a GB News presenter. And he could be a very significant figure in this election, because he could be a massive disruptor of the Conservative vote. You'll remember in the last election, Nigel Farage, another GB News presenter, stood down about 300 candidates.
Well, I ran in that election.
In Tory
I
seats.
was a Brexit Party candidate.
So he stood down, but Richard Tice, I don't think, will, and he could therefore take a lot of votes, or enough votes, from Conservative candidates that could give the election to Labour.
It's amazing how many people on the supposed right who, when they had an absolute duty to destroy the Conservative Party as an obstacle to conservatism, did nothing, kept it in being, endorsed its adoption of Blairite policies. Now, when we're faced with another Blairite government, now they've decided to sabotage the Conservative Party so that we get a Blairite government. It's astonishing how people zig when they should have zagged and zag when they should have zigged every time.
But who are we talking about specifically? What would you have liked people to have done differently?
Well, they should have. When David Cameron went before the electorate saying the Conservative Party is now a Blairite party which has adopted the entire cultural, moral and sexual revolution, and I present myself to you as the heir to Blair, which he did, they should have said, well, thanks very much, but no, we already have a Blairite party in the Labour Party, and they should have not voted for him. The power of not voting is immense, and people don't understand how enormous that power is. By voting, you legitimise the people you vote for. You don't have to. Imagine if they held a general election and everybody just said, sorry, we don't like any of you, and didn't vote for them. There'd be no legitimacy for the resulting government. They'd have to rerun the election. In the case of the Conservative Party, in 2010, it was on its last legs. It deserved to die. Cameron was trying to save it by making it into a second Labour Party, and proper patriotic Conservatives should have refused to vote for it.
Can I just come back to that?
Instead, they endorsed it, and now we have this shower.
Can I just come back to that? Look, I can see to a degree the force of what Peter is saying, and he's running against the grain. The grain is that we should all vote. It's our responsibility to vote. It's our democratic duty to vote. If we don't vote, we can't then complain. I couldn't vote for either I've never voted Tory, but I couldn't vote for either the Conservative Party or the Labour Party last time round, because I couldn't vote for a party that was led by Boris Johnson. I wouldn't have voted for them anyway, but I couldn't vote for a Labour Party that was led by Jeremy Corbyn. So I had a dilemma. What do? Do I spoil my ballot, as Peter might suggest? No, I voted Green. And of course there are problems with the Green Party, but that's what I chose to do. The second thing is Peter keeps talking about the sexual revolution. And I don't think that should pass without challenge, because Peter and I will disagree very fundamentally.
But don't start talking too much about sexual revolutions at 6 o'clock at night.
But Peter, no, we're not talking about it in a pornographic way. I've just been to my friend's house, OK, delivering some of the...
Do we want to know this story?
Yes, it's important. Delivering some of the stuff that our baby has grown out of. The friend I was delivering it to is in a gay civil partnership, thanks to Tony Blair and thanks to Cameron. He could have been married if he chose to, and they've had a baby by surrogate. And personally, I celebrate that, even if Peter doesn't.
What I don't celebrate is the way in which governments have become hostile to marriage. and have pretty much driven the married family, as we previously knew it, out of existence, particularly among the young.
That is a whole
That's something which really needs to be reversed.
That is a whole debate for another day. Lots of people saying, please, can you correct Matthew? Richard Tice is the leader of Reform, not Reclaim.
Sorry, we get so confused with Reform and Reclaim, yes.
There, guys. There are so many different tiny parties, aren't they? I wish that everyone could just come together and actually create some force for good. Anyway, look, all we've got time for. Matt, Peter, thank you. Thanks to you at home too. I'll do the social media conversation tomorrow, but for now, don't go anywhere. Nigel Farage is up next.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Some clear spells out there first overnight, but where we see the clear spells, we also see some mist and fog developing, and quite a number of showers will arrive in many places by dawn. A large area of low pressure to the west of the UK is swinging various weather fronts our way over the next few days, and in between the fronts we'll see some clear spells, but also some showers. A gap in between the systems across northern England into the Midlands, East Anglia overnight could lead to some fog patches by dawn. Otherwise, a lot of cloud on the map as we begin Thursday. That means a mild start, but it also means a bit of a gloomy start. There'll be showers or longer spells of rain across many parts of the country, potential for some heavy rain around the south coast, and some persistent rain setting up across the north and east of Scotland with gales for Shetland and Orkney. Now, because of the increasingly persistent rain across eastern Scotland, there's a rain warning in force. It's not going to be as wet as it was last week, but any additional rainfall, of course, could cause some issues. Elsewhere, it's showers and some frequent heavy downpours in places. They'll continue into Friday across Northern Ireland, Western England, Wales, with some thunder and hail thrown in as well. More persistent rain continues across central and eastern Scotland, the north and east of England as well. And more unsettled weather on the way for Saturday and Sunday, with low pressure continuing to dominate.
Who is it? We're here for the show.